Hello everyone, this is General Haggerty. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. Today we're continuing our series on how to play Global War 1936 to 1945, and in this video we are going to talk about the air class. The air class is everything to do with planes, put it that way. So to find the information on those, like if you're looking in the rule book, you can start on page, I think it's 54. Yeah, it's page 54 and 55. That's where you'll find the information. But also, if you want to find the numbers for them, you've got your card here. Like here's the Great Britain card, right? And that's what you get when you download the rules from Historical Board Gaming. And on the back there's the numbers, and you see right above my thumb there. Sorry, my hand is not working so well today. So there's the numbers on what it costs and what the movement are, and attack and defense and everything. And you'll see it says attack 6 and then 3. The 3 is for interception, the interception or escort, and we'll get into that in a second. And I'm talking about the numbers on the fighter there. And so the medium bomber, it's also got 2 numbers there, and the strat bomber, it's also got 2 numbers. So we'll get into that in a minute. Let's just go to the board here. So this is our, let's take a look at our planes here first. Now the first 2 planes that we have here, over here, this is, these are with the, what you get with the technology. Like if you develop heavy bombers, this is the heavy bomber for the British, or like you can use whatever you want for them, but that is the heavy bomber for the British. And this is a jet fighter if you develop jet aircraft technology for the Commonwealth, because the British are part of the Commonwealth. Now next here we have a strategic bomber, and strategic bombers are vastly different from what they are in Axis and Allies. In Axis and Allies, I mean, you're out there and you're taking part in normal combat, and you're shooting at boats and everything. That's not what happens in this game. It's really kind of weird how that they allow you to do that in that game, but that's not what it's supposed to be. So what else do we have here? Sorry, we have the medium bomber here. Now, a medium bomber is what you would think of a strategic bomber in Axis and Allies. So this thing here, this will attack your facilities, right? Any kind of facilities for that matter. It could be your bases, or it could be your factories. These guys can do strategic bombing on them. And that's what these are basically for, is for strategic bombing, but they're also for carpet bombing, and I'll get into that in a minute. Now over here, tactical bombers. Tactical bombers are different as well. They are mostly for dive bombing on ground units. So they have a targeted value, and we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, they don't do any tactical bombing in this game. So you're not going to attack any bases with a tactical bomber. And then you've got your fighter, and your fighter is even more versatile in this game than the other one. And then you have your air transport over here, and we've got an airborne infantry sitting with them. And then we have a seaplane here. And I'm not going to get into talking about seaplanes. They all have different rules anyway, because apparently not all seaplanes were created equally. But I'm not going to be playing with these seaplanes for a while. I just put it in here because I wanted to show you that there is another type of air class unit in here, but it's not something that you need to know about. Like you'll find out the rules about this if you ever decide to buy some of these, and they're hard to acquire. Like you got to buy 3D printed units. You might have to go to Shapeways to get some. You can't just buy a set of them on Historical Board Gaming, put it that way. But you do find them for most of the nations in the 3D printed units. So anyway, let's get into fighters first, because this is your basic aircraft, okay? So they represent the propeller-driven interceptor. You can land them on carriers. They can attack ground units. They can attack other planes. They can attack naval units. So they're pretty versatile. They'll attack anything. But they also have a special ability, and it's called air superiority. So when you go in for a combat run, you just regular combat. Here, let's set something up here, okay? Let's just move this over here. So move these guys out. Now that we've seen them all, we'll bring them all in separately and show you about them. Okay, so here we have Erwin Rommel's come down here, and he's got his Africa Corps that my buddy Sireblood was kind enough to paint for me. And they've got a tactical bomber, and they've got a fighter in here, okay? Now, the British are going to attack them. Hang on a second here, where are we? There's the British guys. So they're sitting here, and they're going to attack them. And let's say they got 2 fighters in there, okay? We'll get this one, and we'll get this one. Well, what the hell, let's just throw a tactical bomber in. Where is he? There he is. Now you could also bring a medium bomber in here if you wanted to. So all these guys are moving in here, right? Now what happens, among other things, like you've got your artillery that's going to roll first for both sides. Another thing that's going to happen is when you roll your aircraft, and you don't have to roll them first or anything, you're rolling all your units, but when you roll your aircraft, if you get a hit with your fighters, not with your tactical bombers, not with your medium bombers, not with anybody else, just your fighters, because they're the only ones with air superiority. When you get a hit with them on the very first round of combat, then the defender has to choose one of their aircraft as a loss. So let's say the way this shakes down, everybody rolls, and they each get a hit with their fighters, okay? And then this fighter missed. So what'll happen is the British will have to lose an aircraft. So let's just lose one, and so will the Germans here. So the Germans lose an aircraft as well, and they may have lost ground units and everything in that attack. But it's only the first round. So when you go to the second round of combat, the air superiority part of the combat phase is over. It's just in that first phase that you would determine air superiority. Now the fighters, we're still talking about fighters, that they will also participate in strategic bombing raids. So let's just say they're bombing this air facility here, and you're bringing in a strategic bomber, but the Germans decide they want to send up an interceptor. What did I do with my Germans? Oh, there he is. So the Germans decide to send up an interceptor to defend their facility. Plus there's the inherent anti-aircraft gun that is in the airbase. And I'm not going to go right in depth with this strategic bombing raid. I just want to show you how the fighters work, okay? So these guys decide to bring in fighters as well. Now remember, there was 2 numbers on there that I showed you on some of the planes. So let's take a look at those again. So you see the numbers that's in stars here. That's the fighters, right? So attack 3 and defend 3. Those are the ones that are in brackets with a little star beside them. And then you've got your medium bombers has got a 1. Your strategic bombers has got a 1. So those are the 3 units that you would have in a strategic bombing raid. So just for some halibut, let's throw in let's throw in the medium bomber as well, okay? So what would happen here, before the bombing run begins, all the planes roll. Like there's a dogfight here between all the planes. And so the fighters, in this particular instance here, the British will roll 2 at 3 and 2 at 1, because medium bombers and strategic bombers roll at 1 in the air fight. And the fighters roll on attack and defense, they roll at 3. So he rolls at 3, these roll at 3, and these 2 roll at 1, and you see what shakes down. Like maybe this guy gets a hit here, and Britain decides to take off that, and then these guys get a hit as well, so these guys have to take off that because it was the only fighter in that battle. Now you probably wouldn't go up there against this many planes if you only had 1 fighter, right? But if you had 3 of them, though, then you probably would. So that's going to make a determination as to whether or not you're going to bring in fighters, or whether or not you're going to do strategic bombing raid. I mean, because if they got a bunch of fighters in there, then well, those fighters are at 3, whereas your bomber is only at 1. So unless you've got a ton of fighters, not a good idea to do that strategic bombing raid, right? So anyway, that's how a strategic fighter would work as an escort, and this one was called an interceptor. So they can work as escorts and interceptors. Plus, if you remember back to the armor class video, another thing that fighters and tactical bombers can do is they can follow your armor class units in a blitz. So like the British, they go here and they take out these guys here in the first 3 rounds of combat. So this guy comes off, then he goes here. If this plane was in here as well, then he can go for the second attack as well. So you can do the first attack. If it ended in under 3 rounds of combat, then you can do the second attack, assuming that the fighter or tactical bomber, you can do that with just these 2 types of planes. You can't do it with the medium bomber or anything. Just these 2 types of planes can do that, assuming they have enough space left. Like if they had started here and they've got a movement of 4, well, there's an airbase there, so they'd have a movement of 5. So they would go 1 and they'd attack and they'd win that fight. So they can go 2 and attack, and whatever happens there, then in 3, 4, they can fly back there again. As long as they can fly back safely, then they can take part in a blitz. Air bases, I mentioned those as well. If you want to know all about air bases, then I encourage you to go take a look at the video on facilities. That will talk about air bases and naval bases and factories and everything. But for the purposes of this video, they're going to allow all of your aircraft to go 1 extra space. Does all the aircraft that I showed you, they're going to allow them to go 1 extra space, except for that seaplane. But you'll have there are seaplane bases, and it's gonna help your seaplane go 1 extra space. So that's the fighters. Now the tactical bombers are a little different in this game. So they're not going, as I mentioned earlier, they're not going to bomb facilities, but they do have that target selection. So let's say the Germans have these 3 units in here, and you go in and you attack them. But the Germans, they have 3 units, and these units don't cost the same and they don't fight the same. Obviously, you'd want to keep your Tiger tank if you were the German player. So these guys come in and they get 1 hit from the tactical bomber, but that hit was on a 3 or less. So let's say he rolled a 2. Well, that means that this guy gets to choose his casualty. So it's not the defender saying, yeah, I'll just lose the dude. No, no, no. This guy gets to choose a casualty. He's obviously going to take the Tiger tank because that one is worth a lot more than the dude is. So tactical bombers are very powerful that way. And when you're rolling, here, let me just show you the battle board here. So you take a look here, and tactical bombers, they roll the same as a medium bomber, right? They're at 7 or less on an attack there. You would obviously want to roll those 2 separately. Like say you have a tactical bomber and a medium bomber, don't roll both of them at once because the medium bomber doesn't have that target selection. You need to know if you did get a 1 or a 2 or a 3, which plane got that. Because if the medium bomber got the 1, 2, or 3, then that isn't a targeted hit. So just make sure that you roll your tactical bomber separately from your medium bomber in that case. Or it could be that you're rolling with other units if you're in terrain and it's modified and somebody else has to roll at a 7. Anyway, so that's tactical bombers. It can when you're selecting, like I mentioned there, so you're selecting this, it can select any naval or land unit. It can't select a plane. Like if this plane was in here and this guy rolled a 1 to 3, he can't select another plane because these weren't for air combat, right? Remember the fighter, now that's the one that's air superiority. But tactical bombers are really for ground units and for like dive bombing or torpedo bombing boats. Like they would drop a torpedo in the water and hit a boat with it. So they can select on a 1 to 3 boat as well when they're in that kind of combat. And both of these types of planes you can have on an aircraft carrier, right? And we'll get into aircraft carriers when we talk about the C-class units. But these are the only two type of planes that can go on your aircraft carrier. Actually, I believe that the jet fighter can too. He's a fighter, but with kicked up numbers, right? But medium bombers, they don't land on there. Like you need a longer runway if you're using a bomber, right? You can't just land anything on one of those. Okay, so that's tactical bombers. Now, medium bombers, like I mentioned earlier, and there's not much to talk about them. They're kind of like a strategic bomber in Axis and Allies. So they're going to either attack a facility or just take part in an attack. Like that attack that I showed you here, if you took the medium bomber there, then he gets to roll at 7. And when they defend, they don't defend nearly as well though. Let me just take a look at the sheet here. So medium bomber, they attack at 7, but they only defend at 5. The tactical bomber attacked at 7, and it defended at 5. Sorry, medium bomber is 4. The fighter, I don't think I mentioned that either. So the fighter is 6 and 6. He attacks at 6, he defends at 6. And then the tactical bomber is 7 and 5, and the medium bomber is 7 and 4. So anyway, he can take part in your regular type of combat, and he can take part in a strategic bombing raid. He can bomb facilities and bases. So what's next? Your strategic bomber. Now they're large bombers with heavy payloads, so they're not going to be they're kind of high altitude things, right? They're not going to be attacking boats, and they're not going to take part in normal combat. Although they can do some form of land combat, and I'll show you. They can never do carpet bombing against boats, but against land they can. And what they will do, like let's say you've got some land units here, and it doesn't matter what kind of land units are. So you bring your strategic bomber in there, and you say, I'm going to do some tactical bombing. So you only get to do it for 1 round. And with a strategic bomber, you get 3 dice. And these guys, because there's no anti-aircraft artillery, they don't get to shoot back. Like if you had a facility there with an anti-aircraft gun, they still don't get to shoot back, because that's only if you're attacking the facility. You would have to have an anti-aircraft artillery in the zone there to actually get a shot at this guy when he's carpet bombing. So you can go in there and it's basically a free shot against these 3 guys. You get 3 dice and you roll at 2 or less. So like on a 12-sided dice, it's like rolling a 1 on a 6-sided dice, right? So the odds aren't that good, but when you're rolling a bunch of them, right? Like you come in with 2 strategic bombers, that's 6 dice. I mean, you're going to start taking units off. And if you're not doing anything else with your strategic bomber, why not go after somebody? Pick a space where there's some good units, or even if it's just dudes. As long as there's no anti-aircraft gun there, you can go where there's an anti-aircraft gun. But remember, in this game, an anti-aircraft artillery rolls at 3, right? So that's a pretty decent chance. That's a 1 in 4 chance of knocking out your bomber. So I wouldn't go after the ones unless it was really important that you took these guys out, right? And also, like if you were attacking this space, like I was before, you can still do the carpet bombing attack, but this guy's not going to be there for the 2nd round and the 3rd round and the 4th round of combat. He's just going to go in there, drop his payload, and leave. He did his carpet bombing, and again, like all the other planes, he has to be able to have a safe landing spot before he took off. He can't just go on a suicide run. So that's your strategic bombers, and of course they can bomb facilities as well, right? And I'm not going to explain how a strategic bombing raid works because it's really quite complicated and I don't want to get into that, right? I'm trying to keep these videos fairly short. So that's your strategic bomber. Now, the last one we have, let me just talk about this. This is your heavy bomber. Now, this is the same thing as your strategic bomber, except your dice are going to be better. Like your carpet bombing, you get 5 dice, and it's still at 2, but instead of getting 3 dice, you get 5 dice, right? And when you're strategic bombing with this guy, you get 2 d6 to roll, and that whatever adds up there, that's how much damage you did. Well, with one of these things here, you're going to get 3 d6, and with the medium bomber, you're only going to get 1 d6. I'm talking about dice, 1 6-sided dice. 3 6-sided dice and 2 6-sided dice, right? So yeah, these things here are pretty darn powerful. When you're coming in and rolling 5 at 2, then you might even get 2 or 3 hits. You're hopefully trying to get one, gonna get one of them. Anyway, let's get into your air transport. Now, your air transport, I guess I should mention the first couple planes, the fighter and the tactical bomber, they move 4 spaces, and the bombers, the strategic and the medium bombers, they go 6 spaces. And then, of course, if you've got that air base, then they're going to go that 1 extra space, right? Actually, no, sorry, the medium bomber only goes 5. My mistake. I'm just looking over at the numbers here. The medium bomber goes 5, the strategic bomber goes 6. And you add 1 if you're at an airbase. So now the air transport, and that's this one here, he can go 6 spaces. And then if you have the airbase, then he can go 7 spaces. But what they can do, and when I was reading this to do these videos, I kind of realized another mistake I was making before, is that I thought you could only transport airborne with them. Turns out you can only attack with airborne. So like this guy could pick up this unit here. Let's say he's down here and the plane is down here. He can go 1, 2, pick that up and come up here. If he had the space, I don't know that he has. Let's assume that he could make it up there and make it to a place he can land. Then he can drop this guy into combat. But they can pick up any other infantry class unit on non-combat, not after he dropped this guy off. But if you're not doing anything with this one here, he can do a non-combat move with any type of infantry, whether it's airborne or regular infantry or mountain infantry. He can go and transport these to a safe place, place that you own, or a place that you're allowed to land, put it that way. So any infantry class unit can be transported by the transport plane. So also, it must be the last unit selected as a casualty unless they are participating in an airborne assault. So kind of like a naval transport, you can't just lose them as cannon fodder in a naval combat. Like if there's a bunch of high value units, you can't just take this in to lose it for a casualty, right? Unless you had brought an airborne infantry in there, and you got a bunch of other units in there, but you wanted to keep your ground forces. You can't just lose this unless you brought that guy in. Like I could see you wanting to bring him in just to lose, but you'd have to lose him last, so there's no point in even bringing him in. It's like bringing a transport in for no reason if you're not transporting somebody. So I do believe that's it for our air class units. Yep, that's it. Class dismissed.